Imani, wait! Ethan Whitmore's raw cry cuts through the din of a crowded New York cafe, his eyes locked on Amani Carter, a radiant black woman whose strength and beauty once stole his heart. Her long, glossy hair catches the city's glow, but it's the boy beside her, his face a haunting mirror of Ethan's own, that freezes the wealthy CEO in place. The New York streets pulse with secrets, where love and betrayal collide in a single glance. Imani turns, her eyes a storm of pain and defiance, leaving Ethan grasping at a truth buried in 15 years of silence. What shattered their love? What hidden lies await? Dive into this gripping tale at Fiction of Peace. Subscribe now for stories that clutch your soul. Share where you're watching from in the comments, and stay tuned to unravel their heart-wrenching reunion. The New York skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 47th floor office, a constellation of steel and ambition that seemed to bow to no one. Imani Carter stood at the edge of the financial district's pulse, her reflection sharp against the glass. Her long, glossy black hair, gently curled and cascading past her shoulders, framed a face that carried both grace and grit. At 28, she was a rising star in the world of finance, her quick mind slicing through spreadsheets and market trends with the precision of a surgeon. But it wasn't her intellect that drew eyes today. It was the quiet fire in her dark eyes, the kind that could make a room pause. She adjusted her tailored blazer, the deep navy fabric hugging her frame, and turned back to her desk. The hum of the office was relentless, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, brokers shouting numbers like they were casting spells. Imani thrived in it, a black woman who'd clawed her way into a world that rarely welcomed her. Yet beneath her poised exterior, a different rhythm beat, a secret that made her heart race every time she thought of him. Ethan Whitmore. The name alone sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of thrill and danger. He was the CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, a man whose wealth and charm were as legendary as his playboy reputation. Tall, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could disarm a boardroom, Ethan was the kind of man who owned every space he entered. Their first meeting had been a collision of worlds, Imani presenting a risk analysis, Ethan leaning back in his chair, watching her with an intensity that made her falter mid-sentence. "You're not just good at this," he'd said later, catching her in the hallway, his voice low and warm. "You're brilliant." What followed was a whirlwind. Stolen glances turned into late-night talks over coffee and dive bars, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite. Their differences, race, class, the weight of society's judgment, only fueled their connection. In Imani's cramped Harlem apartment, they danced to old jazz records, her laughter mingling with his as he spun her under the flickering light of a single bulb. Ethan, who could have dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, sat cross-legged on her worn rug, eating takeout from the Chinese place downstairs. "This is better than any penthouse view," he'd whisper, his fingers tracing her palm, promising a future neither dared to define. But love, like a flame, burns brightest before it flickers. 2 months into their romance, Ethan began to change. His texts grew sporadic, his calls shorter. Imani chalked it up to his demanding schedule, deals to close, investors to charm. She ignored the whispers in her gut, the ones that warned her something was wrong. She'd catch him staring out windows, his jaw tight. But when she asked, he'd flash that disarming smile and say, "Just work, Imani. You know how it is." Then one Tuesday morning, he was gone. No call, no text, no trace. His phone went straight to voicemail, the robotic greeting mocking her growing panic. Imani scoured his usual haunts, the sleek office at Whitmore Enterprises, the rooftop bar where they'd shared their first kiss. But he was a ghost. Her messages piled up, unanswered, each one a weight sinking deeper into her chest. She told herself he'd explain, that he'd walk through her door with that crooked grin and a story to smooth it all over. But days turned into weeks, and hope began to curdle. The breaking point came on a crisp afternoon, the city buzzing with its usual chaos. Imani stood outside Whitmore Enterprises, her breath visible in the chilly air, clutching a scarf that still held the faint scent of Ethan's cologne. She'd come to confront him, to demand answers. The revolving doors spun, and there he was, Ethan, in a tailored gray suit, his arm linked with a woman. She was tall, blonde, her white coat pristine against the autumn gloom. Clarissa. Imani didn't know her name then, but she'd learn it later, each syllable a shard in her heart. They laughed, heads close, as if the world belonged to them alone. Imani's feet moved before her mind could catch up. "Ethan!" Her voice cut through the street's din, sharp and raw. He turned, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. She waited for recognition, for the spark that had lit their nights together. But his gaze was cold, empty, like she was a stranger who'd wandered into his path. Clarissa tugged his arm, her smile tight, and Ethan turned away, stepping into a waiting car without a word. The door slammed shut, and the car pulled away, leaving Imani rooted to the sidewalk, the world tilting beneath her. She stumbled to a nearby bench, her breath ragged. Passers-by glanced at her, some with pity, others with indifference, but none saw the fracture spreading through her. She replayed every moment, every promise, searching for the cracks she'd missed. Had it all been a lie? The nights he'd held her, whispering dreams of a life together, had they meant nothing? Her fingers dug into her palms, nails biting skin, as she fought the tears burning her eyes. She wouldn't cry. Not here, not for him. The days that followed were a blur of pain. Imani returned to her apartment, the walls once warm with laughter, now suffocatingly silent. She called in sick, unable to face the office where she'd first met Ethan. Her phone remained quiet. No apologies, no explanations. Then came the letter from her landlord, eviction notice, effective in 30 days. Her job, already precarious after missing shifts, slipped away when her boss cited performance issues. The final blow landed when her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her, passed away in her sleep. Imani sat alone in the hospital room, holding her grandmother's hand, the weight of loss crushing her. It was in that hospital, amidst the sterile hum of machines, that Imani felt a flutter in her stomach. A routine check confirmed it. She was 3 months pregnant. The news was a paradox, a spark of life in a world that felt dead. She pressed a hand to her belly, imagining the child growing there, a piece of Ethan she couldn't escape. But with that thought came a surge of anger. He'd left her, erased her, and now she carried his child in a life unraveling at the seams. Imani walked home through Harlem's crowded streets, the city's pulse mocking her own faltering one. She passed the Chinese restaurant where Ethan had brought her dumplings, the park where they danced under streetlights. Each memory was a knife, twisting deeper. She stopped at her apartment door, the eviction notice taped to it like a taunt. Inside, she sank to the floor, clutching her grandmother's old shawl, the fabric soft and worn. "I can't do this," she whispered, but even as the words left her lips, she knew she would. For the child growing inside her, for the woman her grandmother had raised her to be, she would fight. The city outside her window roared on, indifferent to her pain. Imani rose, her reflection in the cracked mirror showing a woman changed. Her eyes, once bright with love, now burned with resolve. Ethan Whitmore had shattered her heart, but he wouldn't break her. She would survive this, not just for herself, but for the life she now carried. The future was uncertain, a dark horizon, but Imani Carter was no stranger to fighting for her place in the world. And this fight, she vowed, would be her fiercest yet. The Harlem dawn broke in shades of gray, a muted light filtering through the cracked windows of Imani Carter's tiny apartment. The eviction notice still clung to the door, its edges curling like a warning of the life unraveling beyond it. Imani stood in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured water into a chipped mug, the weight of her pregnancy pressing against her resolve. 3 months along, and the world she'd known, her job, her grandmother, Ethan Whitmore, had crumbled to ash. But Imani was no stranger to hardship. Like a weed pushing through concrete, she'd learned to thrive where others might wither. This, she told herself, was just another crack to break through. Her apartment was a battlefield of memories. The jazz records she danced to with Ethan sat untouched on a shelf, gathering dust. The couch where her grandmother had told stories of resilience now sagged under the weight of unpaid bills. Imani's fingers grazed her belly, a silent promise to the life growing there. She couldn't afford to spare, not when a child depended on her. She packed what little she owned into 2 duffel bags, clothes, a photo of her grandmother smiling in a garden, and a worn notebook filled with her dreams. The rest she left behind, stepping into the cold Harlem morning with nothing but determination. Finding work was a grind. The financial world that once celebrated her brilliance now turned its back. Her sudden departure from the firm branding her unreliable. Imani took what she could get, cleaning offices at night, scrubbing floors in midtown high-rises while her body ached from pregnancy. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover a shared room in a crowded tenement, but she worked with a quiet ferocity. Her hands, once soft from typing reports, grew calloused, her nails chipped from bleach and grit. Yet in those long, lonely hours, she found a strange clarity. Each scrubbed tile was a defiance, a refusal to let Ethan's betrayal define her. Her lifeline came in the form of Uncle Henry, her grandmother's younger brother, a man with a booming laugh and eyes that carried the weight of his struggles. Henry ran a small auto shop in the Bronx, his hands stained with grease but his heart wide open. When Imani showed up at his doorstep, 6 months pregnant and hollow-eyed, he didn't ask questions. He pulled her into a hug, his flannel shirt smelling of oil and home. "Your family, Imani," he said, his voice rough but kind. "You and that baby ain't ever alone." Henry's apartment became her refuge. It was cramped, the walls lined with photos of family reunions and faded Polaroids of Imani as a child, grinning beside her grandmother. He gave her his bedroom, sleeping on a pull-out couch, and cooked her meals. Burnt toast and eggs, but made with love. At night, as Imani lay awake, feeling the baby kick, Henry would sit nearby, telling stories of their family's resilience, how their ancestors survived worse, how her grandmother had raised her alone after Imani's mother left. "We're weeds, Imani," he'd say, his voice steady. "We grow where they don't want us, stronger for it." By the time Malik was born, Imani had scraped together enough to rent a 1-room apartment above a Chinese restaurant, the air thick with the scent of dumplings. The delivery was grueling, each contraction a reminder of Ethan's absence. But when the nurse placed Malik in her arms, Imani felt a love so fierce it drowned out the pain. His tiny face, with eyes that mirrored Ethan's piercing blue, was both a wound and a wonder. She vowed he'd never know the sting of abandonment, that she'd be enough, mother, father, everything. The years that followed were a blur of survival. Imani worked double shifts, cleaning by night and waitressing by day, her body a machine fueled by necessity. Every dollar went to Malik: diapers, formula, secondhand clothes from thrift stores. She'd come home exhausted, her hair tied back in a messy bun, and find Malik giggling in his crib, his chubby hands reaching for her. Those moments were her salvation, the reason she kept going. She taught him to read before he was 3, sitting on the floor with library books, her voice soft but steady. "You're gonna be somebody, Malik," she'd whisper, kissing his forehead. "Somebody great." When Malik was 4, Imani leaped. She'd always loved baking, a skill learned at her grandmother's knee, kneading dough in a sunlit kitchen. With Henry's help, a small loan and a beat-up oven from his shop, she started selling cakes from her apartment. Word spread through the neighborhood: Imani's red velvet cupcakes, her lemon pound cake, each bite a taste of love. By Malik's 5th birthday, she'd saved enough to lease a tiny storefront on 125th Street. Malik's Bakery, she named it, painting the sign herself, the letters bold and proud. The shop was modest, mismatched tables, a flickering neon sign, but it was hers, a testament to her refusal to break. Malik grew up in that bakery, his laughter filling the space as he played with toy cars under the counter. Imani watched him with a fierce pride, noting the way his eyes crinkled like Ethan's when he smiled, though she buried that thought deep. She never spoke of his father, not to Malik, not to anyone. When Malik asked, as children do, why he didn't have a dad, Imani would crouch down, her hands cupping his face. "You've got me, baby," she'd say, her voice unwavering. "And Uncle Henry, we're your team." Malik would nod, accepting her answer, but his eyes sometimes lingered on other kids with fathers at the park, a quiet question she couldn't answer. Henry was their rock. He'd stop by the bakery after closing his shop, bringing tools to fix a leaky faucet or a broken chair, his presence a steady anchor. He taught Malik how to toss a basketball, cheering louder than anyone when Malik made his first shot in a youth league game. Imani watched them, her heart swelling but shadowed by guilt. She'd built a life for Malik, but it was a life without half of who he was. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the present. The bakery's growing reputation, Malik's bright smile, the community that embraced them. The bakery became a haven. Neighbors gathered there, sharing stories over coffee and pastries. Imani hired a local teen, Tasha, to help with orders, and soon the shop was a hub of laughter and warmth. But late at night, when Malik slept and the city quieted, Imani would sit at the counter, her hands wrapped around a cold mug, staring at the photo of her grandmother on the wall. She'd survived loss before, her mother, her grandmother, Ethan. But the weight of raising Malik alone was a different kind of heavy. She wondered if she was enough, if she could give him the life he deserved. One evening, as she locked up the bakery, a customer left behind a newspaper. Ethan's face stared up from the business section, his smile as sharp as ever, announcing a new merger for Whitmore Enterprises. Imani's heart stuttered, the old wound tearing open. She tore the page out, crumpling it into the trash. "You don't get to haunt me," she whispered, her voice fierce. She turned off the lights, the neon sign flickering out, and climbed the stairs to her apartment. Malik was asleep, his face peaceful, unaware of the man whose blood ran through him. Imani kissed his forehead, her resolve hardening. She was a weed, unbreakable, and she'd make damn sure her son was too. The New York afternoon pulsed with the restless energy of a city that never slowed. Ethan Whitmore sat alone at a corner table in a sleek midtown cafe, the kind where power suits and whispered deals filled the air. At 43, he was still the man who commanded boardrooms, his tailored charcoal suit sharp against his broad shoulders, his blue eyes scanning a tablet with the latest market reports. But beneath the polished exterior, a hollowness lingered, a void he couldn't name. Success had built him an empire, yet the penthouse views and private jets felt like trophies for a game he no longer understood. He sipped his black coffee, the bitterness mirroring the unease that had haunted him for years, a sense that something vital was missing. Outside, the city churned. Taxis honked, pedestrians wove through the chaos, and the autumn light cast long shadows on the pavement. Ethan's gaze drifted to the window, distracted by a familiar silhouette. A woman with long, glossy black hair, gently curled, moved with a grace that stopped his breath. Imani Carter. Her name hit him like a forgotten melody, stirring a pang deep in his chest. She was older now, her face carrying the weight of years, but her beauty was undimmed, radiant even in a simple wool coat. Beside her walked a teenage boy, tall and lanky, his stride confident, but his eyes, Ethan froze. Those eyes were his own, a piercing blue that mirrored the ones he saw in the mirror every morning. The boy's face, sharp and familiar, was a ghost of Ethan's youth, a living echo he couldn't comprehend. His coffee cup clattered against the saucer, drawing glances from nearby tables. Ethan stood, his chair scraping the floor, and pushed through the cafe door, the bell jangling behind him. "Imani!" His voice was raw, louder than he intended, cutting through the street's din. She turned, her eyes meeting his, and for a moment, time collapsed. The years fell away, and he saw her as she was in their Harlem nights, laughing, spinning in his arms to a scratchy jazz record. But her expression hardened, a flash of pain and fury, and she gripped the boy's arm, pulling him away. The boy glanced back, confused, his face a haunting replica of Ethan's own at 15. "Imani, wait!" Ethan called, weaving through the crowd, his polished shoes slipping on the damp pavement. She didn't stop, her pace quickening as she and the boy rounded a corner. Ethan's heart pounded, a mix of desperation and dread. Who was that boy? Why did he look like him? The questions clawed at him, but Imani's cold dismissal burned worse. He'd hurt her. He knew that, though the details were a fog, fragments of a life he couldn't fully grasp. The accident, the hospital, the years abroad, they blurred in his mind, leaving gaps he'd never filled. He caught up to them at a crosswalk, breathless, his tie askew. "Imani, please," he said, his voice softer now, pleading. She stopped, her back rigid, and turned to face him. Her eyes were a storm, dark and unyielding, and the boy, Malik, he'd heard her call him, stood protectively at her side, his gaze wary. "What do you want, Ethan?" Imani's voice was low, each word a blade. "You don't get to walk back into my life like nothing happened." "I don't understand," Ethan said, his hands raised as if to ward off her anger. "I saw you, and him." He gestured to Malik, whose resemblance sent a shiver through him. "Who is he?" Imani's lips tightened, her silence a wall. Malik's eyes darted between them, his confusion palpable. Before Ethan could press further, a man stepped forward, broad-shouldered and grizzled, his work boots scuffed with years of labor. Uncle Henry, Imani's grandmother's brother, his face etched with a protective fury Ethan didn't recognize. "You've got no business here, Whitmore," Henry said, his voice a low growl. He planted himself between Ethan and Imani, his grease-stained hands clenched. "You walked away. Don't come sniffing around now." Ethan's mind raced, grasping for clarity. "Walked away? Henry, He stopped, the fog in his memory thickening. "I had an accident. I don't remember." Henry's laugh was bitter, cutting through the street's hum. "An accident? That's what you're selling?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You were in a car crash, sure. Nearly died. But your family, those high and mighty Whitmores, they made sure you forgot her." He jerked his head toward Imani, who stood silent, her arms crossed. "They shipped you off to some fancy clinic in Switzerland, told the world you were recovering, but they erased Imani from your life, told you she'd betrayed you, fed you lies to keep you away." Ethan's knees buckled, and he steadied himself against a lamppost. "Lies?" His voice was a whisper, the world tilting. Images flashed, hospital beds, sterile rooms, his mother's cold voice assuring him he was better off. "I didn't know," he said, looking at Imani, desperation cracking his composure. "I swear I didn't know." Imani's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. "You didn't want to know," she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You left me, Ethan. You left us." The word us hung heavy, and Ethan's gaze flicked to Malik, the boy's blue eyes boring into him. A son. The realization hit like a punch, stealing his breath. He opened his mouth, but no words came. "Mom, who's this?" Malik asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Imani's hand tightened on his shoulder, a silent shield. "Nobody," she said, her tone final. "Let's go." She turned, guiding Malik away, but Ethan's voice broke through, raw and desperate. "Imani, please. I need to understand." She paused, her back to him, and for a moment he thought she'd turn back. But she didn't. She walked away, Malik at her side, leaving Ethan alone on the crowded street, his heart a tangle of guilt and longing. Back in his penthouse that night, Ethan paced, the city's lights a mocking backdrop. The encounter had cracked something open, a flood of questions he couldn't answer. He poured a whiskey, the glass cold in his hand, but didn't drink. Instead, he rifled through a locked drawer, pulling out a worn leather journal he hadn't touched in years. Its pages were filled with his handwriting, frantic notes from before the accident. Imani called. No answer. Try again. Meet Imani at the park, 7 p.m. The entry stopped abruptly, the rest blank, a life interrupted. Then he found it, tucked in the back, a crumpled envelope, yellowed with age. His name was scrawled in Imani's elegant script. With trembling hands, he opened it, unfolding a letter that shattered the fog in his mind. "Ethan," it began, "I found out today I'm pregnant. I'm scared, but I'm hoping this baby brings you back. Our child deserves you." The words blurred as tears stung his eyes. Pregnant. A child. His child. And his family had hidden it, buried it like they'd buried his love for Imani. He sank onto the couch, the letter clutched to his chest. The accident, the lies, the years stolen. It was too much. He saw Malik's face again. Those blue eyes, his eyes, and the weight of what he'd lost crashed over him. Imani had raised their son alone, while he'd built an empire on a foundation of deceit. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, crisp and cold. She's not for you, Ethan. You're meant for more. More. The word tasted like ash. Ethan stood, the journal falling to the floor. He didn't know how to fix this, didn't know if he could. But he knew one thing. He had a son, and Imani was the woman he'd loved. Still loved, if he was honest. The city outside glittered, indifferent, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt something stir. Not ambition, not power, but a desperate need to reclaim what he'd lost. He grabbed his coat, the letter still in his hand, and headed for the door. He didn't know where Imani was, but he'd find her. He had to. The Harlem dusk painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, casting a soft glow over the cracked sidewalks and bustling streets. Imani Carter stood behind the counter of Malik's bakery, her hands dusted with flour, her long black hair tied back in a loose braid. The scent of warm vanilla and cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the hum of customers chatting over coffee. But Imani's mind was elsewhere, replaying the encounter with Ethan Whitmore 2 days ago. His voice, raw with desperation, had cracked the armor she'd built over 15 years. She wiped her hands on her apron, her movements sharp, as if she could scrub away the memory of his face. Those blue eyes mirrored in her son Malik, staring back at her with a plea she wasn't ready to hear. The bell above the door jingled, and Imani's heart lurched. Ethan stood there, his usual polished suit replaced by a simple jacket and jeans, his face etched with a vulnerability she didn't recognize. The cafe quieted, eyes darting to the man who didn't belong in this world of worn tables and community warmth. Malik, wiping down a counter nearby, froze, his teenage frame tensing as he glanced between his mother and the stranger. "Imani," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "I need to talk, please." Her instinct was to turn him away, to shield Malik from the man who'd abandoned them. But something in Ethan's eyes, haunted, searching, held her still. She nodded curtly, gesturing to a corner table. "5 minutes," she said, her tone ice cold. Malik watched, his jaw tight, but stayed silent, his rag twisting in his hands. Ethan sat, his hands clasped tightly, as if anchoring himself. "I read your letter," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The one you wrote when you were pregnant. My family hid it from me. I didn't know, Imani. I swear, I didn't know about Malik." His words hit like a gust of wind, stirring the ashes of her pain. She wanted to believe him, but the memory of his cold dismissal outside his office 15 years ago burned too brightly. "You didn't know because you didn't care," she said, her voice low and sharp. "You walked away, Ethan. You chose." He flinched but didn't look away. "I was in an accident," he said, his words measured as if piecing together a puzzle. "A car crash. I lost months of my memory, including you. My family. They told me you'd betrayed me, fed me lies to keep me away. I was too broken to question them." He pulled out a worn leather journal, its pages dog-eared, and slid it across the table. "This was mine before the crash. Look at it." Imani hesitated, her fingers hovering over the journal. Against her better judgment, she opened it, her eyes scanning the frantic scrawl. "Call Imani. Meet her at the park. Don't lose her." The words were a knife cutting through her defenses. She snapped it shut, her breath uneven. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her voice wavered, betraying the crack in her resolve. Malik approached, his eyes narrowing. "Mom, you okay?" His tone was protective, but curious, his gaze flicking to Ethan. Imani nodded, forcing a smile. "Go finish up, baby. I've got this." Malik lingered, then returned to his work, casting wary glances over his shoulder. Ethan leaned forward, his voice urgent. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Imani. I just want to understand what I lost. Let me try. For him." He nodded toward Malik, who was stacking chairs with practiced ease. Imani's chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't deserve a place in their lives. But Malik's laughter from earlier that day, when he'd shot hoops with Uncle Henry, echoed in her mind. Her son deserved to know his father, even if it tore her apart to allow it. "Fine," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "But you don't get to waltz in and play dad. You earn it." Ethan nodded, relief flooding his face. "Thank you," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her look away, afraid of what she might feel. The next day, Ethan showed up at the bakery again, this time with a basketball under his arm. Malik was outside shooting hoops on a rickety hoop nailed to a telephone pole. Ethan hesitated, then joined him, tossing the ball with an awkwardness that betrayed his years behind a desk. Malik eyed him skeptically but took the pass, dribbling with a skill that made Ethan's eyes widen. "Nice moves," Ethan said, attempting a grin. Malik didn't smile back, but he passed the ball, a silent test. Imani watched from the bakery window, her heart a tangle of fear and hope. She remembered Ethan's laugh from their old days, the way he'd spin her in the park under Harlem's streetlights. Those memories were dangerous, threatening to soften the wall she'd built. She turned away, focusing on kneading dough, but her thoughts kept drifting to the man outside, trying to connect with a son he didn't know. Over the next week, Ethan became a quiet presence. He showed up after Malik's school hours, helping with small tasks at the bakery, carrying flour sacks, fixing a wobbly table. Malik called him Mr. Ethan, his tone polite but distant, a barrier Imani understood too well. One evening, Ethan suggested they visit the park where he and Imani used to go. She resisted, but Malik's curiosity won out. "I want to see it," he said, his voice soft but insistent. Imani relented, her stomach nodding as they walked the familiar path. The park was unchanged, its benches worn, the air thick with the scent of autumn leaves. Ethan stopped by a lamppost, his eyes distant. "We danced here," he said almost to himself. "You wore that red scarf, and we laughed until midnight." Imani's breath caught, the memory flooding back, his arms around her, the world fading away. She saw a flicker of that Ethan now, his face softening as he looked at her. "I'm starting to remember," he said, his voice raw. "Bits and pieces. Your laugh, the way you'd hum Ella Fitzgerald. It's coming back." Imani's throat tightened, but she shook her head. "Don't do this," she said, her voice low. "You can't just pick up where we left off." Ethan nodded, his eyes shadowed. "I know, but I need to know what I lost, Imani. For me and him." He glanced at Malik, who was tossing pebbles into a pond, his face unreadable. That night, back at the bakery, Malik asked, "Why is he trying so hard, Mom?" Imani paused, her hand still in the dough. "He's your father," she said finally, the words heavy. Malik's eyes widened, then narrowed. "He left us. Why should I care?" Imani pulled him close, her heart aching. "You don't have to care, baby, but you deserve to know him. Decide for yourself." Ethan kept coming, his presence a quiet insistence. He helped Malik with his jump shot, listened to his stories about school, and once, when a customer got too rowdy, stepped in with a calm authority that made Malik's eyes flicker with respect. Imani watched, torn between the past and the present. Each memory Ethan recalled, a late-night coffee run, a shared umbrella in the rain, chipped away at her resolve. But the pain of his abandonment lingered, a wound too deep to ignore. One evening, as they closed the bakery, Ethan lingered by the counter, his hands in his pockets. "I found something else," he said, pulling out a faded photo from his wallet. It was them, younger, laughing in a diner booth, Imani's head on his shoulder. "I kept this, even when I didn't know why." Imani stared at the photo, her fingers trembling. She wanted to tear it up, to bury the past, but instead, she handed it back. "Keep it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But don't think it fixes anything." As Ethan left, the bell jingling behind him, Imani leaned against the counter, her heart a storm of anger and longing. The memories were stirring, not just for him, but for her. And that scared her more than anything. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria glittered under crystal chandeliers, a sea of champagne flutes and tailored tuxedos swirling in the opulent haze of New York's elite. Imani Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, her emerald dress hugging her curves, her long black hair cascading in soft curls that caught the light. She felt out of place, a Harlem baker in a world of wealth and whispers, but her chin was high, her eyes sharp with defiance. Beside her, Malik, her 15-year-old son, tugged at his borrowed tie, his blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, scanning the room with a mix of curiosity and unease. They were here at the invitation of Clarissa Davenport, a name that still sent a chill through Imani's veins. The woman who'd stood arm in arm with Ethan all those years ago, the day he'd walked past her like a stranger. Ethan Whitmore hovered nearby, his presence a quiet anchor. He'd insisted on coming, his jaw tight when Imani showed him the gala invitation, embossed with Clarissa's name. "She's up to something," he'd warned, his voice low, haunted by the fragments of memory he'd pieced together. The accident, the lies, his family's betrayal. Imani had wanted to refuse, to keep her son and herself far from this gilded trap, but Malik's quiet plea, "Let's see what she wants, Mom," had swayed her. Now as they stood in the ballroom, the air thick with perfume and ambition, Imani's instincts screamed danger. Clarissa swept into view, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, her white gown a stark contrast to Imani's vibrant green. She was all smiles, her voice honeyed as she greeted guests, but her eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto Imani's with a predator's precision. "Imani Carter," she said, extending a manicured hand, "how wonderful you could make it." Her tone dripped with false warmth, and Imani's grip was firm, a silent challenge. "Clarissa," she replied, her voice steady, "your invitation was unexpected." Malik shifted beside her, his teenage frame tense, while Ethan stood closer, his hand brushing Imani's elbow, a subtle reassurance. Clarissa's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm hosting this gala to support local businesses," she said, gesturing to the banners proclaiming New York's future. "Your bakery, Malik's Bakery, is quite the success story. I thought it deserved recognition." The words were smooth, but Imani caught the edge beneath them, a blade hidden in silk. The evening unfolded with speeches and applause, the crowd fawning over Clarissa's supposed philanthropy. Imani sipped her water, her eyes never leaving Clarissa, who moved through the room like a queen commanding her court. Ethan leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "She's playing a game," he murmured. "My brother's here too. James. They're connected." Imani's gaze flicked to a man in a navy suit, his features sharp like Ethan's but colder, watching them from across the room. Her stomach knotted. James Whitmore, Ethan's older brother, had always disapproved of her, his disdain palpable even in their brief encounters years ago. As the night reached its peak, Clarissa took the stage, her voice amplified by the microphone, cutting through the room's hum. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her smile radiant, "tonight is about second chances, about lifting those who've overcome adversity." The crowd clapped, but Imani's skin prickled. Clarissa's eyes found hers and the air grew heavy. "I want to highlight a remarkable story, Malik's Bakery, run by Imani Carter, a single mother who built a legacy from nothing." The applause grew, but Clarissa's next words were a dagger. "But legacies can hide secrets, can't they?" A screen behind her flickered to life, projecting a grainy document, a supposed contract, dated 15 years ago, claiming Imani had blackmailed Ethan for money during their relationship. The room gasped, whispers erupting like wildfire. Malik's face paled, his fist clenching, while Imani stood frozen, the accusation a slap across her soul. She'd never seen that document, never asked Ethan for a dime. It was a lie, a meticulously crafted one, and Clarissa's triumphant smirk confirmed her as its architect. Ethan surged forward, his voice thunderous. "This is a fabrication," he shouted, stepping toward the stage. The crowd parted, eyes wide, as he faced Clarissa. "You've been lying for years, Clarissa. You and my family, you tore us apart." His words echoed, raw and unyielding, and Imani's heart raced, torn between fear and a flicker of pride. Clarissa's composure faltered, but she recovered quickly, her laugh sharp. "Oh, Ethan, always so dramatic. This is about truth, not your delusions." Malik grabbed Imani's hand, his voice low but fierce. "Mom, she's lying, right?" Imani nodded, her throat tight. "She's trying to destroy us, baby," she whispered, her eyes locked on Clarissa. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, some faces sympathetic, others skeptical. Imani felt exposed, her life laid bare for judgment, but she straightened, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let this woman unravel what she'd built. Ethan climbed onto the stage, his presence commanding despite the chaos. 15 years ago, he said, his voice steady but laced with pain, I was in a car accident. I lost my memory and my family, Clarissa included, fed me lies about Imani. They told me she betrayed me, that she was after my money, but I'm remembering now. He turned to the crowd, his eyes blazing. I loved her. I would have given her everything. And you, he pointed at Clarissa, you made sure I forgot her. You made sure I forgot my son. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Clarissa's face twisted, her facade cracking. You're pathetic, Ethan, she spat, clinging to a past that never existed. That woman, she gestured to Imani, used you, and now she's using her son to play the victim. Malik stepped forward, his teenage voice cutting through the tension. Don't talk about my mom like that. His defiance drew gasps, and Imani's heart swelled, though fear gripped her. She pulled him back, whispering, Not here, Malik. Ethan turned to Imani, his eyes pleading. I'm sorry, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. I let them manipulate me, but I'm here now, and I won't let her hurt you again. He faced Clarissa, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You were my brother's mistress, Clarissa. You orchestrated this to keep me away from Imani, because you and my family couldn't stand her, because she's black, because she was better than you'll ever be. The accusation hung heavy, and Clarissa's eyes widened, her composure shattering. James Whitmore pushed through the crowd, his face red with fury. Enough, Ethan, he barked. You're embarrassing yourself. But Ethan didn't back down. No, James, you're the one who should be ashamed. You knew about the lies. You knew about my son. The crowd buzzed, phones already out, recording the spectacle. Imani's hands trembled, but she stepped forward, her voice clear despite the storm inside. This isn't about your gala, Clarissa, she said, addressing the room. This is about a woman who tried to erase me and my son from Ethan's life. But we're still here. Malik's Bakery isn't just a business. It's our heart, our home, and you can't take that away. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, their support a shield against Clarissa's venom. Clarissa's face contorted, but she had no retort. Security approached, ushered by James, who shot Ethan a look of disgust before escorting Clarissa off the stage. Ethan stepped down, joining Imani and Malik, his hand grazing hers in a fleeting touch of solidarity. Malik looked at him, his eyes conflicted but softening, a crack in his armor. As they left the ballroom, the city's lights glittering beyond the windows, Imani felt the weight of the night settle on her shoulders. Clarissa's lies had wounded her, but Ethan's stand had stirred something. Hope, perhaps, or the ghost of trust. She glanced at Malik, who walked silently beside her, his face a mix of pride and confusion. Ethan followed, his steps heavy, the journal in his pocket a reminder of the truth he was still uncovering. The gala had exposed Clarissa's betrayal, but Imani knew the real battle was just beginning. The morning sun cast a harsh glare over Harlem, its light slicing through the windows of Malik's Bakery, where Imani Carter stood behind the counter, her hands steady despite the storm brewing inside her. The bakery, usually a haven of warmth and cinnamon-scented comfort, felt like a battlefield today. A press conference was set to begin in an hour, a desperate bid to secure funding for the bakery's expansion, a dream Imani had nurtured for years. But the air was thick with tension, the fallout from Clarissa Davenport's gala still rippling through their lives. Imani's long black hair, swept into a tight bun, framed a face etched with resolve, her dark eyes scanning the room for any sign of trouble. Malik, her 15-year-old son, arranged chairs for the reporters, his movements quick, but his blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, clouded with unease. Ethan Whitmore stood by the door, his usual polish replaced by a rumpled shirt and a haunted expression, as if he carried the weight of 15 stolen years on his shoulders. The gala had exposed Clarissa's venom, her fabricated document accusing Imani of blackmail, branding the bakery as a fraud in the eyes of the city's elite. Whispers of the scandal had spread, and now as reporters filed in, their cameras glinting like predators' eyes, Imani felt the stakes rising. She'd fought too hard to let Clarissa's lies destroy what she'd built. Ethan caught her gaze, his nod a silent promise of support. But Imani's trust in him was fragile, a thread stretched thin by years of betrayal. Malik, wiping down a table, glanced at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and wariness, the word father still foreign on his tongue. The press conference began smoothly, with Imani speaking first, her voice clear and commanding. Malik's Bakery isn't just a business, she said, her hands steady on the podium. It's a home for this community, a place where kids like my son can dream big. We're here to ask for your support to expand, to give more kids a chance. The reporters nodded, some scribbling, others filming, and for a moment, Imani felt hope flicker. But then the door swung open, and Clarissa strode in, her blonde hair gleaming, her white suit pristine, a venomous smile curling her lips. The room hushed, the air electric with anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Clarissa announced, her voice smooth as glass, "before you invest in this venture, you should know the truth." She held up a tablet, and the screen behind her lit up with a video. It showed Ethan, grainy but unmistakable, handing an envelope to Imani in a dimly lit alley, his voice dubbed to say, "Take the money and keep quiet." The crowd gasped, reporters leaning forward, their cameras zooming in. Imani's heart plummeted, the lie so brazen it stole her breath. Malik's face paled, his fists clenching, while Ethan stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. "This is a lie," Ethan roared, stepping toward the podium, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "That video is fake." But the damage was done. Reporters fired questions, their voices overlapping. "Is it true, Ms. Carter? Did you extort Mr. Whitmore?" Imani's hands trembled, but she straightened, her voice steady. "I've never taken a dime from anyone," she said, her eyes locked on Clarissa. "This is a desperate attempt to ruin us." Malik, unable to stay silent, pushed forward, his teenage voice cracking with fury. "You're lying," he shouted at Clarissa. "My mom built this place with her own hands. You don't get to tear it down." The crowd murmured, some moved by his passion, others skeptical. Clarissa's smile didn't waver. "Oh, Malik," she said, her tone dripping with pity. "Your mother's been using you to play the victim. It's time the truth came out." Ethan's patience snapped. He grabbed the tablet from Clarissa's hand, his face a mask of rage. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice low and dangerous. He turned to the crowd, holding up the tablet. "This video is a fabrication. Look at my wrist." He pointed to the screen, where a gold watch glinted on his arm. "I've never owned a watch like that. Never." The reporters leaned closer, some nodding as they noticed the discrepancy. Ethan's voice grew stronger. "Clarissa orchestrated my accident 15 years ago. She cut the brakes on my car, separated me from Imani, and lied to me about my own life." The room erupted, cameras flashing, voices shouting. Clarissa's composure cracked, her eyes darting to the exit. But Ethan wasn't done. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he played a recovered audio file. A technician had salvaged it from an old phone found in his family's storage. Clarissa's voice, cold and calculated, filled the room. "The breaks are done. He won't remember her when he wakes up. The Whitmores will owe me." The crowd fell silent, the truth a sledgehammer. Imani's breath caught, her eyes meeting Ethan's, a mix of shock and gratitude flickering within her. Malik seized the moment, grabbing the microphone. "This is my mom's bakery," he said, his voice steady despite his youth. "She raised me alone, worked nights, built this place from nothing. And you," he pointed at Clarissa, "you tried to take it all away, but we're stronger than your lies." The reporters applauded, some standing, their cameras now trained on Clarissa, who backed away, her face ashen. Security guards, summoned by a quick-thinking reporter, moved toward Clarissa. "You're under arrest," one said, citing the audio as evidence of attempted harm. As they cuffed her, Clarissa's mask fell completely, her voice shrill. "You don't understand," she screamed. "The Whitmores wanted her gone. They paid to keep Ethan in a coma longer, to make sure he forgot her." The revelation stunned the room, and Ethan's face crumpled, the betrayal of his family cutting deeper than he'd imagined. He turned to Imani, his eyes pleading. "I didn't know," he whispered, but she didn't respond, her focus on Malik, who stood tall, a beacon of her strength. The reporters swarmed, but Imani raised a hand, silencing them. "This press conference was about our future," she said, her voice unwavering. "Clarissa tried to steal that, but she failed. Malik's bakery will keep going, with or without your funding, because it's built on love, not lies. The crowd erupted in cheers and Malik hugged her, his face buried in her shoulder. Ethan stood apart, his heart heavy with the truth of his family's cruelty. As Clarissa was led away, James Whitmore, Ethan's brother, slipped out the back, his face pale. Ethan watched him go, knowing the confrontation with his family was inevitable. But for now he turned to Imani and Malik, stepping closer. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I let them manipulate me, but I'm here now." Imani's eyes softened, but she didn't speak, her hand resting on Malik's shoulder. The reporters began packing up, some already drafting headlines about Clarissa's arrest and the bakery's resilience. Imani locked eyes with Ethan, a silent acknowledgement of his stand. But the wound of 15 years still lingered. Malik broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm. "You helped us today, Mr. Ethan, but don't think this makes you my dad." Ethan nodded, accepting the rebuke, his resolve hardening to earn that title. As the crowd dispersed, Imani stood in the quiet bakery, the sunlight streaming through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air. The battle with Clarissa was won, but the war for trust, for family, was far from over. Ethan lingered by the door, his silhouette framed against the Harlem street, a man caught between his past and the future he longed for. Imani turned away, her heart a tangle of pain and possibility, knowing the truth had set them free, but had also opened a door to a reckoning none of them could avoid. The Harlem evening settled softly, a gentle hum of life pulsing through the streets as the neon sign of Malik's bakery flickered to life. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fresh-baked bread and the quiet weight of a family on the cusp of change. Imani Carter stood at the counter, her hands kneading dough with a rhythm born of years, her long black hair tied back in a loose braid that shimmered under the warm lights. Her face, though tired, carried a resilience that had carried her through 15 years of hardship. Malik, her son, now 15, wiped down tables, his movements quick, but his blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, reflecting a storm of emotions. The press conference had exposed Clarissa's lies, turned the tide for the bakery, but it had also unearthed a truth that shook them all. Ethan's family had kept him in a coma to erase Imani and Malik from his life. Ethan Whitmore lingered in the doorway, his once pristine suit replaced by a simple sweater, his broad shoulders hunched as if bearing the weight of his rediscovered past. He'd walked away from Whitmore Enterprises, resigning from the board in a move that sent shockwaves through New York's financial world. The headlines screamed of his fall from grace, but Ethan cared little for their noise. His focus was here, in this small bakery, with the woman and son he'd lost to lies. Imani glanced at him, her expression guarded but softer than before, the cracks in her armor letting slivers of hope seep through. Malik, however, kept his distance, his teenage heart wrestling with the man who'd stood up for them, but still felt like a stranger. The bakery was quiet tonight, the usual crowd thinned by the scandal's aftermath. Imani had insisted on staying open, a defiant stand against those who'd tried to tear them down. Ethan stepped inside, his boots scuffing the worn floor, and offered a tentative smile. "Need help?" he asked, gesturing to the trays of pastries. Imani hesitated, then nodded, handing him an apron. "Don't burn anything," she said, a hint of a smile breaking through her stern tone. Malik snorted from across the room, but his eyes followed Ethan, curious despite himself. As they worked, Ethan clumsily shaping dough under Imani's watchful eye. The silence between them was heavy but not hostile. The rhythm of the bakery, the clink of pans, and the hum of the oven became a bridge. Ethan broke the quiet, his voice low. "I'm investing in community projects," he said, his hands dusted with flour. "Not as a CEO, but me. Supporting businesses like yours, Imani. Black-owned, community-driven." Imani's hands paused, her eyes meeting his. "Why now?" she asked, her voice sharp but searching. Ethan looked at Malik, who was stacking chairs, and said, "Because I missed 15 years. I want to be part of something real." Malik's head snapped up, his expression a mix of skepticism and longing. "You think money fixes that?" he asked, his voice cutting. Ethan shook his head, his eyes steady. "Not money, time, work. I want to earn your trust, Malik. The boy's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away, a silent acknowledgement of Ethan's effort. Later, as they closed up, Imani pulled a yellowed envelope from her apron pocket, her fingers trembling. "This is for you," she said, handing it to Ethan. It was the letter she'd written 15 years ago, when she'd learned she was pregnant with Malik. Ethan's breath caught as he unfolded it, the paper brittle with age. "Dear Ethan, I found out today we're having a baby. I'm scared, but I hope this brings you back. Our child deserves you." The words were a gut punch, each one a reminder of the life he'd been stolen from. Tears welled in his eyes and he looked at Imani, his voice breaking. "I would have come back," he said. "If I'd known, I would have fought for you." Imani's eyes glistened, but she held herself steady. "You didn't fight then," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You left me to fight alone." Ethan nodded, accepting the truth. "I know, but I'm fighting now. For you, for him." He glanced at Malik, who stood by the door listening, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The next day, Ethan returned, this time with a box of baking tools he'd bought, a clumsy attempt to contribute. Imani raised an eyebrow but let him stay, guiding him through frosting cupcakes with a patience that surprised her. Malik watched from the counter, his silence softening as Ethan fumbled, smearing icing on his sleeve. "You're terrible at this," Malik said, a grin breaking through. Ethan laughed, the sound warm and unguarded. "Give me time, kid. I'm learning." For the first time, Malik didn't correct him, didn't call him Mr. Ethan. The shift was small, but it felt monumental. That evening, they sat in the apartment above the bakery, a cramped space filled with love-worn furniture and Malik's basketball trophies. Mani brought out a photo album, her hands hesitant as she opened it. "Malik deserves to know you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The photos traced Malik's life, his first steps, his gap-toothed grin at 6, his proud moment accepting a school award. Ethan's fingers lingered on each image, his heart aching for the moments he'd missed. "He's incredible," he said, his voice thick. "Because of you, Imani." Malik, sprawled on the couch, looked up from his phone. "Mom did everything," he said, his tone matter-of-fact but proud. "She worked nights, saved every penny for this place." Ethan nodded, his eyes on Imani. "I know. She's the strongest person I've ever met." Imani looked away, her cheeks warming, the compliment stirring memories she'd tried to bury. The next morning, Ethan joined them at a community event, a cleanup at a nearby park. Malik handed him a rake, half expecting him to bail, but Ethan worked tirelessly, his hands blistering as he cleared debris alongside neighbors. Imani watched, her heart a tangle of caution and hope. When Malik tripped, scraping his knee, Ethan was there, kneeling to check the wound with a gentleness that made Imani's breath catch. Malik, usually stoic, let him help, his eyes softening. "Thanks," he muttered, and Ethan's smile was a beacon in the morning light. Back at the bakery, as they washed dishes side by side, Malik spoke up, his voice tentative. "Why'd you stay away so long?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the soapy water. Ethan paused, the weight of the question heavy. "I was lost," he said honestly. "My family lied to me, made me think your mom didn't want me. But I should have fought harder to find the truth. I'm here now, Malik. I want to be your dad, if you'll let me." Malik's hands stilled, his face unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Okay," he said, his voice barely audible. "But you got to keep showing up." Ethan's eyes glistened, and he extended a hand, which Malik shook, the grip firm and real. Imani, watching from the counter, felt tears prick her eyes. She turned away, busying herself with a tray, afraid of the hope blooming in her chest. That night, as they locked up, Malik hugged Ethan, a quick, awkward embrace that caught them both off guard. "Night, Dad," he said, the words slipping out like a confession. Ethan froze, then hugged him back, his voice choked. "Night, son." Imani watched, her heart swelling, the pain of 15 years easing just a fraction. She handed Ethan the photo album, a silent invitation to stay in their lives. As he left, the bell jingling behind him, Imani felt the first stirrings of healing, a fragile bridge between past and present, built on the love she'd never stopped carrying. The Harlem sunrise bathed Malik's bakery in a golden glow. The neon sign, Malik's Bakery, a place of second chances, humming with promise. Inside, the scent of fresh cinnamon rolls mingled with hope, the counters laden with pastries that told the story of Imani Carter's resilience. She stood at the heart of her domain, her long black hair in soft curls, her emerald dress vibrant against the flour-dusted apron she'd set aside for today's grand reopening. Her dark eyes, once shadowed by betrayal, now shone with quiet triumph. This was more than a bakery. It was a testament to her strength, a beacon for the community that had rallied around her. Malik, 15 and lanky, moved through the crowd, his blue eyes, Ethan's eyes, bright with pride. The press conference had exposed Clarissa's lies, her arrest a victory, but today's gathering felt like true redemption. Ethan Whitmore stood by the door, no longer the polished CEO but a man in a simple sweater, his hands rough from weeks of helping at the bakery. He'd walked away from Whitmore Enterprises, the headlines calling it a fall, but to him it was a rise, to family, to truth. The bakery buzzed with neighbors and donors, their laughter a warm embrace. Uncle Henry, in a clean jacket, handed out pastries, his grin wide. Malik darted between tables, his smile infectious, while Ethan watched, his heart full. The boy who'd called him Dad was no longer a stranger, but earning that title was a daily vow. Imani took the podium, her voice steady. Malik's Bakery is our home, she said, a place of second chances, built by love in this community. The crowd cheered, raising coffee cups in salute. A reporter's voice cut through. Ms. Carter, did Ethan fund this to silence you about his family's crimes? The room tensed, but Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm. I'm here as a father, not a financier. The Whitmores tried to erase Imani and Malik. I choose them now. His words silenced the skeptic, but a familiar figure emerged. James Whitmore, Ethan's brother, his face taut with disdain. You're throwing away our legacy, he spat. Ethan's eyes blazed. Your legacy is lies. I choose family. James retreated, the crowd's disapproval chasing him out. Imani touched Ethan's arm, a silent thank you. She addressed the crowd, her voice resolute. We're building a future here, for every kid who needs a chance. Malik hugged her, his face buried in her shoulder, and Ethan stood close, his presence a quiet anchor. The applause was thunderous, a community united. In the kitchen, away from the noise, Ethan found Imani arranging cupcakes. Thank you, he said, his voice soft, for letting me know Malik. Imani's eyes met his, guarded but warm. He wanted it, she said, but the past isn't gone. Ethan pulled out her letter from 15 years ago, its words etched in his heart. I read this every night, he said. It reminds me what I lost. Imani's breath hitched, but she shook her head. You can't undo 15 years, Ethan. He nodded, stepping closer. I know, but I'll spend every day earning you back. Malik burst in, breaking the tension. Mom, they love the cupcakes. He paused, sensing the moment, then grinned at Ethan. You staying? Ethan's smile was soft. As long as you'll have me. Imani handed him a cupcake, a truce. Don't mess up the frosting, she teased, her smile faint but real. Outside, the crowd spilled onto the street, kids playing, music drifting. A local photographer called, Picture time! Imani, Malik, and Ethan stood before the bakery, the neon sign glowing above. Malik was in the center, his hoodie bright, Imani in her emerald dress, Ethan in his sweater. As the camera flashed, Ethan's hand brushed Imani's, and she didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his, a fleeting promise. The crowd cheered, the sun sank, and the bakery stood as a beacon of hope. The past couldn't be undone, but this moment, their family together, was a new beginning. What a journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. Did Imani, Ethan, and Malik's story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. How did their reunion make you feel? Your support means the world to us at Fiction of Peace, so hit that like button and subscribe to catch our latest stories every week. Thank you for joining us in this emotional tale of second chances. Until next time, keep believing in new beginnings. See you soon.